Welcome to the Nourish Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nourish Child Podcast. Jill here, and today I have a special episode for you. It is a sponsored episode. And I am talking about infant formula, innovation, regulation, and empowering parents to make the best decision for their families with Dr. Devon Kuehn. Dr. Kuehn is a board-certified pediatrician and neonatologist and the chief medical officer at ByHeart, a fully integrated baby nutrition company dedicated to empowering parents with choice. As the CMO, Devon leads all innovation and product development, clinical research, nutrition science, medical affairs and education, post-market surveillance, and regulatory activities for the company. Before she joined ByHeart, she was chief medical officer at Pediatric Research, the only dedicated pediatric clinical research organization in the United States. Her medical career was primarily at East Carolina University as a neonatologist, and she earned her medical degree from the Uniformed Services University and completed her pediatric residency and neonatal fellowship training at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. We have a lovely conversation about baby formula. Specifically, we are at a point right now where we are on the heels of that infant formula shortage. With that came a lot of baby formulas onto the market from various parts of the world. We've seen a lot of changes, a lot of nutrient additions to baby formula. And so Dr. Devon is going to help us sort through all of what's been going on in this market sector. We're going to talk about how ingredients are selected for infant formula and how innovation happens and the regulations that must be followed. We'll also discuss the upsides and downsides of innovation in the baby formula market and why infant formula is so variable. I don't know about you, but if you've been in the grocery store and you see all of these different brands, it can be very confusing about, what is important for your baby? What are you getting in this formula? And so she's going to help us suss through some of that. We're going to talk about how close infant formula can actually get to breast milk. And we'll talk about some of the foundational ingredients in infant formula, like whole milk versus using skim milk. We'll discuss the path to FDA approval and the ingredients that are considered safe for baby formula. And we'll even dive into the differences between US and European formulas for baby. So hold on to your seats, folks. This is a good one. You might want to take out your pen and paper and take some notes, but this is a robust interview, and I hope you enjoy it. Listen in. Well, hello, Dr. Devon Kuehn. Welcome to the Nourish Child Podcast.
Hi, Jill. It's so great to be here.
It's great to have you back on the show. You were here a couple of years ago, and I'm excited to have you here to talk about infant formula again, but we're going to zoom in on regulations, and quite a bit has happened since you were here last time. Hello, infant formula shortage, which was a big one. But before we dive into some of the questions in the conversation we're going to have, can you tell us and my audience a little bit about your background and how you got where you are today?
Yes. Well, first, I'm going to thank you again for having me back, Jill, and giving me the opportunity to talk about my two favorite topics, which are infant nutrition and innovation in infant formula. So truly honored, truly excited to be here. I am a board certified pediatrician and neonatologist and the chief medical officer at ByHeart. And as a neonatologist, which is a doctor that takes care of premature and sick babies, I was always so focused on nutrition and just how important nutrition was for their growth, but also their lifelong health. And so in that world, when I discovered ByHeart, which was a new infant formula company at the time, or a new infant nutrition company, really focused on data-driven innovation for the benefit of babies, I thought, aha, I figured out what I need to do with my life. And I've been with the company now for over 4 years, and I lead all of our research, our product development, regulatory, and safety. And so really get to lead the charge on innovation for infant nutrition and for babies, which is really exciting. And I'm really proud of some of the distinctions that ByHeart's been able to bring to infant formula here in the US. We are the first American-made infant formula to utilize whole milk, and we'll get into that a little bit more and why that's so exciting. We also have the closest to breast milk patented protein blend. We own our end-to-end manufacturing, which, as you sort of talked about, hello, supply chain shortages. That is something that ByHeart really doubled down on in sort of what's been happening in this category more recently, and the importance of ownership and redundancy. And this also makes sure that we have control of our quality standards. And lastly, we are the only and the first infant formula company to get all 3 of Clean Label Project awards, which we'll get into the importance of that and purity, but it really shows our commitment to high standards and purity. So
yeah,
excited to be here today, understand why all these are distinctions with you and sort of talk about them more and more.
Yeah, yeah. And, infant formula is such an important food category. When we're thinking about infant nutrition, the first year of life, a lot is going on. We really do rely on either breast milk or infant formula to fully supply an infant's nutritional requirements. And I'm really curious about, why are regulations so different in the United States for infant formula than it is for just regular people food, we'll call it. Grown-up food, kid food.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that question, Jill, which is, infant formula is the most regulated food in the United States. And why is that? It's because it is sole source nutrition for infants during a majority of their first year of life. And so unlike all other regular food or, toddlers and adults that are eating variety of food, this is really what infants see for that whole first year for a majority of their nutrition. And they're developing, right? So we know that they have unique potential vulnerabilities. And so as a result, the FDA has created unique regulations specific to infant formula in the food category. And some of those are, one, you have to demonstrate and provide data on safety and growth of this food. 2, there are unique regulations on how infant formula can be manufactured and the environment in which it can be manufactured, distinct from food. And there's unique requirements on safety reporting. So, once it's in the market, it is the responsibility of infant formula companies to be looking for safety of their product and reporting that to the FDA. And lastly, there regulations around recall and communication and management of that. And so I think in partnership with the FDA, infant formula manufacturers take on a serious responsibility of this food they're making for sole source nutrition for a vulnerable population. What is similar between, all food that we eat, that our toddlers eat, and infant formula is ingredients must be recognized or designated as safe for foods, right? And so in the regulatory world, this is called as GRAS, or generally recognized as safe. And that means that you have the data and evidence to demonstrate that this specific ingredient is safe for humans to eat. But there's also additional requirements that you have to demonstrate that that ingredient is also safe for infant formula. So there are a lot of foods that are safe, but not necessarily considered safe for infant formula.
Can you maybe talk about what some of those foods might be that are considered safe, but not necessarily safe for infant formula?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one that we often get asked a lot, it has to do with sort of oils and vegetable oils, right? Mm-hmm. And so I, love the fact that infant formula is food and we get fats in that food. And a big source of those is either from our whole milk, which we'll talk about, or vegetable oils. Avocado and olive oil are not determined to be safe for infant formula. So these are very common oils, used in human food that are not safe for infant formula. And
interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And then I think what's also really interesting about the ingredients in infant formula is, in addition to the individual ingredients having to be safe for infant formula, there are also regulations around the quantities. And so infant formula has regulations on how much protein, how much fat, how much carbohydrate, and even some of our vitamins and minerals. What's unique, though, is manufacturers have the flexibility on type, right? So that, yes, you must have this much protein, but how you decide to make up that protein sort of is determined by that list of ingredients that are determined to be safe. And you can mix and match those.
Interesting.
In an interesting way that makes sure you're meeting the nutritional requirements of a baby. And one of the things I love in this is whole milk, right? Which we brought uniquely to this category, which spans both your proteins and fats and starts to bring in a unique matrix.
Yeah. So let's just back up for a second, because I want to make sure the audience understands that, when you're formulating an infant formula, there are specific nutrient guidelines that you must meet. So, for example, an infant formula must have, X amount of grams of protein per liter, right? Or per 100 milliliters, per 100 milliliters. So there's this recipe, if you will, that every infant formula on the market has to meet these specific threshold requirements for infant formula. And now what I hear you saying is that within those nutrients, say protein, for example, or fat, you have infant formula manufacturers have flexibility in choosing where they sort of source that protein or where they source that fat, but those sources have to be recognized as safe.
Exactly.
Getting back to the former.
Jill.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
Yes.
I want to make sure I'm translating this for the listeners, because it is quite complex.
It is extremely complex, and I think so uniquely different from food that we eat.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. So if there is sort of this recipe that every infant formula manufacturer has to meet, how do we bring innovation into that? How do we get creative with this sort of blueprint that we have to work with?
Right. It's a great question. I think that that's what I'm so excited that, we sort of cracked that nut at ByHeart or tried to figure out that path. And so the reality is that innovation in the infant formula space is really driven by infant formula manufacturers right now, but it has to be ones that are passionate about supporting science, willing to run clinical trials to generate the data and evidence that are needed for FDA, but also more importantly, that parents deserve, and own your own manufacturing. And that journey took ByHeart 7 years, right, to bring in innovation in. And so let's unpack that a little bit more, in each of those sort of categories. And we can get into more and more as we sort of talk today. But for new ingredients, exactly as we sort of talked about, bringing these novel ingredients into infant formula takes time, right? You have to find the right partners that can manufacture these, also have the data and evidence to demonstrate that it's safe. And we also do it with breast milk as our blueprint, right? And so I think we have a natural biological place that we can sort of look to say, okay, biology and breast milk is telling us what is best for babies. So how can we use all of the science that we know, that's still evolving, what's available, and has the data and evidence to generate that it's safe for babies? A great example of this for our formula is alpha-lactalbumin. So alpha-lactalbumin is a very specific protein that is highly abundant in breast milk. And we asked ourselves, why is that, right? And we now know from the science of just evaluating breast milk is that alpha-lactalbumin is high in essential amino acids. And what does that mean? Amino acids are those building blocks that help babies grow. Essential means they have to get it from their diet. And so by using science and saying, hey, there's this really important protein that does a lot of great things for babies, we should try to give that to them in their food. We were able to find a partner and work with them and bring this new ingredient to infant formula, which means we had to make sure it was safe. Then you have to put it in your formula and generate data and evidence for the FDA to say that this protein helps grow babies safely and the right way. And I also think this is the transparency parents deserve in infant formula, right? So as you're talking about innovation, you also want to make sure that innovation means progress, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe better, not just different. And so, that's the next big step. So find these ingredients, put these ingredients together, develop the data around those ingredients, both for the FDA, but more importantly for parents. And then lastly, you have to have the skill and know-how of how to actually manufacture this or how to make this for babies and ensure that every scoop is consistently delivering those nutrients that you're promising. So
Right.
all of this, innovation, finding new ingredients through science, studying them, developing all the evidence and data for safety and adequate growth, as well as manufacturing, all takes expertise and time. And that's great because it's keeping our babies safe, but it also means it really takes the commitment from infant formula companies to do what's best for babies and their parents.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing is, wow, this is a lot of work, a lot of research and development, right? Innovation. And so, on the one hand, we look at the infant formula sort of market and it's like, wow, it's really confusing. There's just a lot out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then on the other hand, there's really not. I mean, there's not a lot of different companies. There might be a lot of different products, but there's not a lot of different companies. And I imagine part of that's because it just takes so much work to get in the game.
Yes, I think you're right. It does take a real commitment, right? And especially from how we've chosen to do it, but also because of the regulatory standards, a real commitment to babies and parents that you're going to do it the right way,
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that ByHeart really tried to focus on was outcomes for babies, right? And so instead of having sort of this ingredient or this sort of recipe development be all around, okay, breast milk is our blueprint. Let's make a checkbox. If it's in there, we should put it in our formula. What's available? So sort of putting together everything we've talked about. If breast milk is your blueprint, you're trying to replicate those ingredients in a checklist sort of way. And then you have sort of this narrow list of what you can use. And then you put all that together and make an infant formula. What ByHeart sort of looked at this paradigm and said, wait, what about if we focus on the outcomes that breast milk's developing and sort of work our way backwards? And so we took a really unique approach to this, which I think ends up driving a lot of quality of what we've done and said, okay, we know breast milk has, drives a really important microbiome, gut health, healthy growth, other sort of important things. And so from that, we worked backwards and said, from this list of ingredients that we have, how can we create a matrix that will create an easy or a gentle to digest formula from the start that drives all these important benefits? And by doing that, we created a really unique matrix of, the two most abundant proteins in breast milk, alpha-lac and lactoferrin. Lactose, which we know babies can digest, broken down proteins, and a prebiotic. So we sort of shifted the paradigm, which I think is hopefully starting to drive a change in how innovation is considered in this category. Back to your point of there just aren't that many. It's sort of been ingredient add to create changes, but like, how can we really leap forward in this industry and try to drive change? And so we said, let's think about the outcomes and the baby at the end and what nutrients are supposed to be doing for them. And then from that, we can start to push and increase that list of ingredients that are safe for babies.
Yeah. So 2 questions. First, let's talk outcomes. If you are going for certain outcomes, what outcomes are you going for? Like,
it's such a great question. And so I think first, I think, again, we can use sort of the gold standard of breast milk. And there's enough evidence now designed on what breast milk drives for babies, right? And so there's data around healthy growth. There's data around their microbiome. There's data around brain development.
Yeah.
There's data around, prevention of allergic disease or sort of immune development and gut health. And so I think you take that list. And I think the other one that, isn't necessarily an outcome, but really, really important to parents is tolerability, right? Easy to digest. And I think the reality of that is that's how babies are communicating to parents, right? And so whether they're spitting up, whether they're, have hard poops, whether they're grunting, I think all new parents can relate that they've never talked about poop more than those first couple months. And so for us, we sort of looked at that list of, what are those outcomes and also what is mattering to parents in this, and how can we use that to understand what's important for nutrition, right? What's important for food for babies? Because I think there's this growing and lovely appreciation that food is medicine, or food does things, right? For you, for me, and even for babies. So how can we know that this food that we're giving them is high quality and also supporting really important development during a really critical time in their life?
Yeah. So that second question that I was thinking about is around breast milk, and sort of one of the, arguments in favor of breast milk is that it's always changing. It's biodynamic. And how can you really know what's being provided at any given point in time?
Yeah.
I'm just curious about what your response would be to that, because that's sort of always been a counter argument to infant formula. It's like, well, breast milk is always changing. It changes based on the mother's diet. It changes based on her, health status. It changes based on the baby's development.
It changes even during a feed, Jill, right?
Yes.
Breast milk is such a wonderfully fun, dynamic food, right?
Yeah.
And I would love to say that even my diet variety is as much as breast milk is, but it's not, right? And so this is a really unique period. Mm-hmm. And so the more that we can start to learn and understand this, the better. What I think is important, and what you're sort of saying, though, is it's the matrix. It's not a single ingredient. And whether it's present this day or not present that day, that is what's driving these benefits for babies, right? And so by sort of learning and understanding how this combination, whether it's changing or whether it's always there, is having impact, that's what sort of the challenge is for us as an infant formula company, right? Is trying to understand how we can create a matrix that drives these benefits that doesn't require that variability necessarily.
So, there is a lot of variation in types of information of infant formula out in the market, right? Where specific ingredients are highlighted. Probiotics comes to mind, right? DHA comes to mind. It seems, it's not that just infant formulas want to be closest to breast milk. It's sort of like, as you said, this is the model, the gold standard. We should all be trying to get as close as we can. But when you look at the market, the infant formula market, and you kind of assess each sort of brand or deliverable from these different infant formulas, what are you seeing in terms of categorizations? That's a tough word to say this morning.
There's so many options out there, right, Jill?
Yes.
And I think that's, and I will say, even as a pediatrician, sometimes I was overwhelmed by how to guide parents when there's just so many different options. And I think exactly what you're getting to. I think a lot of the categorization sort of comes down to ingredients, right? And functionality, this ingredient does this thing, or we are clean and we have, organic ingredients or things like that. And so when I have to sort of break it into two categories, those are the two that often come to mind for me of sort of how infant formula companies are positioning sort of distinctions or trying to create optionality for parents. I think at ByHeart, we said, holy smokes, these two should definitely be together, right? And so we purposely created a functional and clean. But I think more importantly, too, we talk about and we studied our infant formula in totality, right? And that's what drives the benefits. It kind of goes back to that. And I think a lot of the category and innovation that's been happening in the category to date has really been around sort of those ingredient ads like we were talking about, right? So innovation sort of had to start from what's this list of ingredients I can pick from? Let me try to innovate and move this category forward by adding to that list, right? And so that's how it's been. And now we have come in differently and said, what are these outcomes? How can we drive these? Okay, so how do we add to this list, right? Yeah. And so by doing that, we have to focus on the final matrix and the final formula as opposed to sort of I put in this ingredient and now it drives this benefit.
Yeah, I mean, that makes so much sense and seems so much more holistic, right? In terms of sort of just reacting to, oh, there's new science that says babies need XYZ amount of iodine. Oh, we better go make sure our iodine is at that level. I really love that you keep using the word matrix because we think about that in other foods. Dairy foods come to mind because a lot of the research in dairy foods, isn't just on the calcium it provides. It's like the entire food and how it is interacting in the body to create these benefits, not only to bones, but to the immune system and all of these other things. So talk to me about skim milk and the history of skim milk in infant formula, just to give everybody listening just a foundational level from which to understand why you chose to go with whole milk.
Yep. And Jill, you couldn't have said that more perfectly up around the matrix, right? Because skim versus whole milk is exactly this matrix conversation. And I think, historically, skim milk has been used for infant formula. And it was, I think, again, thinking about these categories so distinctly in infant formula of we need protein, we need fat, and we need carbohydrates, and they all come from different sources.
Since we're talking about baby formula, I thought I would take a minute to tell you a little bit about ByHeart. Founded in 2016, ByHeart is a next-generation infant nutrition company that was built from the ground up to obsessively innovate and improve nutrition on behalf of babies. As one of the only fully integrated FDA-registered infant formula brands in the U.S., ByHeart is driven by nutritional excellence and uncompromising quality standards. With manufacturing facilities in Pennsylvania, Oregon, and Iowa, the company is committed to handpicking the finest certified clean ingredients, controlling every step of R&D, and using a small batch blending method to provide parents with unmatched transparency and peace of mind for their babies. As a result, ByHeart is the only U.S.-made infant formula company to earn all 3 prestigious certifications from the Clean Label Project. For more information on ByHeart, visit www.byheart.com.
And so the protein is going to come from skim milk. And because of the difference in whey and casein between cow milk and human milk, we're going to base with skim milk and then add in whey proteins, right? And sort of that was like distinct, okay, we have protein. Now we're going to focus on fat. We'll add that and we'll add carbohydrates. I think exactly as we've just been talking about, you miss out on so many of these important milk fats with that approach. And there are blurred lines between protein, fats, and carbohydrates. And so it's really important to leverage the innate sort of matrix that whole milk is and those fats. And what we do know is that whole milk has milk fat globule membrane. So MFGM, which is a big word that, I think is starting to get a lot more attention. And it's this complex matrix of proteins and fats that really drive benefits for baby. We know it's important for brain development. There's data that shows that it's good for a healthy microbiome. We also know that there's certain positions of fatty acids in milk, specifically in, human milk or cow's milk, that are easier for baby to digest than other sources of fat. And lastly, if you use grass-fed whole milk, you're also going to get in some benefits of vitamins and minerals like lutein or more omega-3s, right? That if you skim all of these good, healthy fats out of milk and you skim milk, you're losing the benefit of that complete matrix. And so this was an innovation that ByHeart sort of recognized was really important for this category and had to go that path of getting it as generally recognized as safe or safe for infant formula. And so uniquely, the FDA found a distinction between skim milk and whole milk and wanted to make sure that we were able to provide all the data and evidence this complete matrix was what was, safe for babies. And so it's a really great question. It's a really exciting sort of shift in, again, that thinking of a matrix and not individual ingredients.
Yeah. I'm curious if you've heard of the COGNIS study, COGNIS, and it is a study that looked at infants fed infant formula that used milk fat membrane globule in the formula with the standard cocktail of nutrients plus synbiotics, which are pre and probiotics together. Infants fed this new innovative formula were compared to the controls were breastfed babies and then standard formula fed babies. And what they showed was that at 6 years of age, these children that used the milk fat globule membrane formula with, that test formula, infant formula, had better IQ scores, had larger brains, had just so many benefits regarding cognitive functioning and intellect. I was just curious if you'd heard about that study.
Definitely. It was one of the foundational ones. Again, I think that's sort of thinking about what are these outcomes, right, that we're trying to drive for. And I think what I love about whole milk is you're innately adding that MFGM, right? And so you're not having to do it as an ingredient add-in. You're saying, wait, we can get it right from the source by ensuring that we use whole milk that has all those healthy fats in it.
Yeah. Just to wrap up this section of the conversation about nutrients, we're talked about sort of the standard recipe of infant formula nutrients, the thresholds of how much, what are the nutrients that must be present in an infant formula, and then what are the negotiables?
Yep, it's a great question, Jill. So I think parents will be reassured, hopefully, to know that there's a list of over 30 nutrients that the FDA say must be in infant formula and have provided guidelines around quantities of how much, whether it's max or min. I mean, protein, fats, and carbohydrates, again, infant formula is food. So it has to provide these basic building blocks for babies. So those are on that list, as are a lot of vitamins and minerals. So these are the non-negotiables, right, that have been established by the regulators based on science and data and evidence and what's necessary for healthy growth. Beyond that, those are the negotiables, right? And so whether there's innovation in DHA or milk fat globule membrane or things like that, these are the negotiables. These are add-ons that are not required by the regulators in the US today.
Okay. So let's talk regulation. Let's move into that conversation, because I think that that's always sort of a important component. I think we take it for granted as consumers, but there's quite a lot going on. And that's why we don't see like a bazillion different formulas coming on the market. And just to compare and contrast, if we look at the baby food market, which is highly innovative over the last 5-10 years, but has very little regulation, we're seeing things like heavy metals and toxins and all that kind of stuff. Talk to me about what it takes for an infant formula, a new infant formula to come into the market, to get approved by the FDA, to, just go through that whole process. What are we talking about here?
I love it. The path is what brings it all together, right? We've sort of talked about, what are some specific regulations? What are ways people can innovate? But then as you're sort of saying, like, but then how do you do it? What's this actual path? How does an infant formula go from an idea or science to actually being on the shelves and being sold, right? And able to feed to babies. So first, I think we've talked about this quite a bit. The ingredients must be safe. So you must start with that, as always. Then you really have to own your own manufacturing, or you have to have established safe manufacturing and a location that's safe for babies. And so, it's ingredients are safe. I now have a recipe. I've created it. Where am I going to make it? Right. And right now in the US, the majority make it themselves. Right. And I think that allows for highest quality standards, control of your end-to-end manufacturing process, as well as ensuring you're meeting all the regulations. Then you have to generate data and safety on that formula, that it grows babies and that it's safe for babies. And then lastly, you have to store it in a place that's safe. And so this is a part we don't often always talk about, but the packaging is also something that is part of your path and journey of bringing a formula to market. And so all of that must be food contact safe, and food contact safe for infant formula, or the type of infant formula, whether it's powder or liquid. And so all of these steps, right, the ingredients are safe, that you know how to manufacture it consistently for every scoop in a safe environment, that you have data and evidence that it grows babies, that it's safe for babies, and that you know how to package it in safe packaging. All of that must get submitted to the FDA for review. And the FDA reviews all of that before it can be sold in the United States. That is really unique for food, as you sort of mentioned, in that that's not the process for any other food. In baby formula, for example, there are regulations around, how it can be manufactured. Again, what ingredients are safe, what can go on the label, but that doesn't have to be reviewed by the regulators before it goes on the shelf. And so that's a real distinction in sort of that path.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what, I just want to back up on that because I'm not sure that landed on my brain the right way. You said that regular food can go out onto the market without FDA looking at it, but that is not the case for infant formula. Infant formula must be reviewed by FDA before it hits the shelves.
Correct.
Okay. That didn't land on my brain the right way for whatever reason. I had
and
to back
I want
up
to
a little bit.
reassure parents there are
Yeah.
regulations around food, right? And the FDA is their partners and ensures all food sold in the United States are safe. And there are regulations around the ingredients being safe and what's on the label and how it's manufactured. But that does not have to be reviewed prior to being on the shelf.
Correct. And that's where we're getting into this whole kerfuffle with baby food, I think. But okay. So flashback, I guess, and let's talk about the infant formula shortage, which sort of opened the gates for other non-US based infant formula manufacturers to enter the market in the United States. Talk to me about that. Tell us what happened and what sort of problems it caused, perhaps, or solutions it delivered. Let's, sort of talk through that.
So I'll first and foremost say, as a pediatrician, as a neonatologist, as an infant formula manufacturer, I'm grateful for everyone that feeds babies, right? And the infant formula shortage definitely pointed out a very high risk supply chain challenge that we had in this country. And, we are committed to solving that. But I think in that instance, the United States government said we must feed our babies and we must feed our babies in safe, appropriate formulas and sort of open up to the world and said, please, if you can provide formula for us right now, reach out to us. And so they were able then to identify infant formula manufacturers that had records of safe production and distribution of infant formula and allow those to come into the United States. The regulations for making, infant formula outside of the US are different. And we can get into that a little bit more, but they are different. And so in sort of opening up this opportunity, it created sort of the question of how is the FDA going to provide the same reassurances of these formulas that they have been on formulas that have been sold in the US to date. And so the FDA actually created a path for these formulas called the enforcement discretion, where they had to sort of follow a roadmap in how to demonstrate that they could meet the standard US regulations for infant formula. And so that path is actually still ongoing. And FDA works closely with these infant formula companies through these milestones because, as we talked about, the path for us to meet those regulations took 7 years, right? And we overnight sort of said, okay, can you reassure us that this is safe enough? And then we are going to be your partner through this very prolonged journey to make sure that you meet our regulations. And so that is still ongoing. And there's, the chance that, some of these formulas will not be able to meet US regulations and will no longer be on shelf. But I think, again, grateful for everyone that's feeding babies. I hope that all of them are able to meet our standards because I believe in the standards that the FDA set, and I think they're the appropriate standards for babies.
Yeah. And I think that the consumer, kind of across the board, whether it's baby formula or baby food or even baby clothes, for some reason, Americans think anything that is sort of from Europe is somehow healthier, somehow better, somehow less, loaded with the undesirable ingredients that we seek to, I guess, get better at. What comes to mind is, food colors and dyes and how the standards in Europe is very different. And that's really caught on here for a lot of families. What's behind that? And is that in existence in the infant formula sort of marketplace too. Are consumers automatically thinking that a European formula is better, is healthier, is more nutritious for babies than an American-based formula?
Yeah, it's a really tricky question, Jill. And I think it sort of gets back to some of what we were talking about, which is our regulations are different. And I believe our regulations are at the highest of standards, right? And so I like to reassure parents that the FDA has taken considerable attention to how we feed our babies in this country and established appropriate standards. And so I like to reassure them that infant formula is a unique category here. The regulations really ensure highest quality, best manufacturing practices, like safe, ingredients and composition for your babies. And personally, when, I look at the difference between the two, I don't see much of a difference, right? Both countries, or whether it's European or the US, both have regulations on composition, labeling, manufacturing, right? And where some of the difference really lies is maybe on unique ingredients, right? And so whether, this single protein is determined to be safe in the US versus determined to be safe in Europe, right? And so sort of that what ingredients you can pick from are slightly different. What is unique is that in Europe right now, you don't have to generate clinical data on your formula to demonstrate its growth and safety.
Interesting.
Unless it is a formula that's broken down proteins. And that's a newer regulation that's just come in the last couple of years in Europe. So that is a unique place where parents get the data and transparency, or should get the data and transparency from their infant formula companies here in the US, because it's a requirement, where it's not in Europe. And I think the other, thing I always like to caution parents about when they're bringing in formulas from Europe, not necessarily an enforcement discretion, but otherwise, is there are no regulations for sort of safety reporting or recall notification if you're importing in formulas that haven't been reviewed by the FDA. And so that is, that's a risk to babies, because those are all under the jurisdiction of European regulations, not US regulations. And more importantly, is sort of, we've talked about, the supply chain fragility, right? And so looking for infant formula that's manufactured here in the US that is not subject to import, with either whether it's port strikes or sort of in times of shortage, having it here that can sort of reduce supply chain challenges is supportive of parents. And so I like to reassure parents of the regulations and sort of the infrastructure that we have here in the US and how that can ensure high quality formula for their babies.
Let's talk a little bit about heavy metals in infant formula. Are those sort of looked at by the FDA? What's sort of that's a hot topic in just pediatric nutrition in general. Heavy metals, microplastics, arsenic, cadmium, lead, all of these things are sort of top of mind in other aspects of childhood nutrition and the food that kids eat. Is that of concern? Is that of something that FDA regulates and looks at for formula?
They do, definitely for the ingredients, right? So again, the ingredients must be determined as safe, and there are thresholds and limits there, as well as, how you're manufacturing. And so there's components of it. What I will say is there are pieces of legislation now really aimed at protecting infants and children and heavy metals in food sources. And so, Prop 65 in California, as well as California now has an AB 899 that really requires disclosure of heavy metals and adherence to label for food, infant food, right, and toddler food. FDA has also more recently come out with their initiative of Closer to Zero, which is really trying to reduce exposure, or aimed at reducing exposure of heavy metals while maintaining a diversity of nutrition. So this spans beyond infant formula, but I think what you're seeing is even increased beyond, sort of what I said of what regulations are in place, increased attention both at the state and federal level to really reduce heavy metals in food sources across the board, which includes infant formula. I think one of the components of Closer to Zero that's really fascinating for me is that we currently lack a lot of thresholds and limits for some of these heavy metals, which makes it a unique challenge, right? Not only for parents in trying to understand what's safe, for infant formula manufacturers or food manufacturers that are trying to reduce levels, and then also, practitioners or people trying to explain, what matters here. And I think why this is so important is that, I think widely we know that heavy metals are not good for humans.
Yeah.
And where it becomes a challenge is a lot of times the exposure and the impact of that exposure is dependent on age and size, right? And so that makes infants the most vulnerable. And
Correct.
so how I've tried to reassure parents, or how I think we can reassure parents, is third-party testing, right? Unbiased third-party testing that is occurring in the country right now, trying to find a trusted partner in that is, can give you those certifications, can give you that reassurance that this product has been tested and has lower levels.
And are those in, like, the Clean Label Project comes to mind? Is that sort of what you're talking about in terms
exactly
of
what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Those sites and sources that have, done the work. A Clean Label Project specifically has looked worldwide, to try and establish their own thresholds and limits and what must be achieved in order to reach their certifications. And so I think that's one that's been a good partner to parents and very transparent in their methods and their results.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about empowering parents as we sort of wrap up this conversation. Who should parents, caregivers trust when it comes to making decisions about infant formula? What should they do? What should they be researching? What kind of homework should they be doing?
Such a great question. And I think, I always start when I talk to parents as a reminder to trust themselves. I know that seems so silly, but I will tell you time and time again, and being a pediatrician and neonatologist, parental instinct is really strong, right?
Yeah.
I think, so I start there, but I appreciate, especially when it comes to feeding your baby, it's a highly stressful time. There's so much to consider. It's often one of the first decisions we make as parents. So it's just this very unique moment. And there's an appreciation for external validation, right? Like, I hear my instincts, but I just want them validated as a parent. And sometimes this comes from community, doctors, friends, websites, everything. And so when they start sort of looking for this diversity of external validation, and which can sort of add to the confusion, add to the overwhelm, I like to remind them to stop and think and say, what's important to me? Right? Like, how am I trying to make this decision? For me as a scientist, I'm always driven by data and evidence, right? And so the more places I can get data and evidence and trusted sources, that's what matters to me. Some parents really care about clean, right? And so how are they defining that? Who are those Clean Label Project, those third-party sort of certifiers that they can trust in, right? And so by sort of doing that and understanding what's important to them, I think they can feel more empowered, right? When they're sort of looking at their research and doing their homework, and empowered that hopefully they can have all of their needs met, right? By looking and doing this homework, doing this research and evidence. And at ByHeart, we call that no compromise nutrition, right? Know what's important to you, look for it, and feel empowered that you found it. And lastly, I think, in this category, I will say, do your homework early. I think, what best of intentions, parents always, have a plan. But we know that 75% of babies are on formula by 6 months of life. So the more you can do your homework before you need to have done your homework, which I guess is a lesson for all of us in procrastination anyway. But so do that homework early, know what's important to you, and look for those trusted sources. And I truly believe that infant formula manufacturers should be your partner. They should be transparently sharing this data. They should be a primary source for you for validation. And that's something parents should be looking for and feel empowered when they find that.
Yeah. Great advice, Devon. Really good advice. Is there anything else you would like to share with the audience regarding the infant formula category, ByHeart itself, as a company that can provide an infant formula that targets all of these outcomes that you've been researching for quite some time? Anything else you want to share? And as you think about that, also, please follow that up with how people can get in touch with you, where they can find ByHeart, where they can learn more about it.
Great. Yeah, Jill, we've covered so much today,
I know.
which I love, right? And I'm even trying to digest myself and sort of, all of the things that we're able to cover for parents and sort of understanding this really unique food, right? And so I always try to remind parents to think of it as food, first and foremost, but a food that does really important things for their baby, and to look for those studies and that data that meet their needs and what's important to them. Again, don't compromise in this category. And you should be able to find partners that support you in that, including ByHeart. And so how they can reach us, I am always available and always happy to talk to parents. I will say aside from these moments, it's one of my other favorite things to do is to really make parents feel empowered. So we have hello at ByHeart that parents can always reach out to, ask any questions. They can ask specifically to talk to someone on our sort of medical team and get more advice or just other questions. And so I encourage them to always do that. Our website is also a great resource. So www.byheart.com. We have all of our information there. As I said, we're really, we believe parents deserve transparency in their ingredients and their formula in the company, right? And so we have a lot of information there as well. And you can find us almost everywhere now, which is really exciting, Jill. So we are in a majority of the retailers, over 70% of retailers where you can buy infant formula now carry ByHeart. Some big ones are Target and Walmart and Whole Foods, and then a lot of local retailers. You can also buy us right from our website. We have an amazing feeding plan, which means you can set it and forget it, which as a new parent, one less thing that I had to be shopping for was a huge win for me. And lastly, we are available on Amazon as well. So hopefully meeting parents wherever they need to find us.
That's amazing. Devon, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I just want to remind listeners that we had a conversation before, Devon and I, and it was episode number 160. So this is a great double episode. If you want to go back to the earlier days of the podcast, listen to episode number 160. That was really talking about just innovation in infant formula. And then pair that with this episode, which really hones in on regulation and ingredients and nutrients. And it's quite a nice little infant formula nutrition class, if you will. But Devon, thank you again so much for your time and your expertise and experience in this category. I think it's really, the innovation is really exciting, and it makes me excited to see infant formula sort of evolve in a positive direction. And I love the outcomes oriented endpoints that you've established for this formula, which I think is really stellar. So thanks again for being here.
Thanks so much for the time, Jill. I really appreciate it.
Hey, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Nourished Child with Dr. Devon Kuehn. It's fascinating to think about infant formula A as a primary food for infants and everything that goes into that, including, all the research that has to happen before you can actually bring a formula to market, and the regulation behind keeping formulas safe and nutritious for babies. I hope you got a lot out of this conversation. I know I enjoyed it so much, and I thought this was a really valuable piece of information, particularly if you're a parent of a baby, because it's a big decision. What to feed your baby is a big decision. So I hope that this episode also helped you feel more empowered in making that decision. As always, if you have questions about this interview, you can always shoot me an email. You can contact Dr. Devon at hello@byheart.com. Also, make sure to go over, check out their website, byheart.com, and you can learn more there. I hope you have a great week. And as always, be sure to give that child in your life a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child Podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.